Sally McGee with McGee Coaching Solutions, and your next lesson on this alcohol-free challenge. So we are wrapping up week 2 of the program, and I thought for today's lesson we would do just a quick flash through the slides of the highlights from this past week, and then leave you with a little bit of time in today's program with some journaling questions and some deeper thinking about your progress so far. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to just do a real quick flash through the slides here of our week 2. So some week 2 reflections or highlights. If you recall, we started this week out with the 3 reasons we drink. So there was a series on that explained the first reason was that just purely the substance. Alcohol is an addictive substance. Some of the highlights there were that we had talked about was that we are not broken if we are drinking more than that we want to, and alcohol did exactly what it was designed to do, which is make you want more of it. It does change our brain chemistry. And we talked also a little bit about that dopamine hit that we feel when we consume it. So that was the first reason why we drink, part 1. And then part 2, we talked a little bit about the cultural impact and the cultural influences that might be driving some of our behaviors. I mentioned in this lesson how big alcohol took the playbook directly from big tobacco. And so a lot of our conditioning that is really in our subconscious minds is that we think alcohol is the thing to do at parties, right? At social gatherings. It is so embedded into our culture that it's everywhere we go, every type of event. So that was part 2 of the reasons why we drink. And then the third reason we drink, we talked a bit about the habit process and our neuropathways. So our habits, our neuropathways, I described in this lesson, they're like that hiking trail in our brains. As we're changing our habits, we need to blaze new trails, right? We need to put on a new pair of running shoes and go a different direction. And our brain's ability to do that, to change course and to change our habits, is the process called neuroplasticity. And so I talked a bit about that, and this whole learning process is very busy graph here. But what this did was really help to sink in the fact that learning is not a one-time event, that we need to really reinforce the learning over time, and that's how our new behaviors really stick. The key here, as if you'll recall, and I'll keep coming back to this because it's so important, is to have the positive emotion, which really sinks in the new behaviors. When you experience something positive, that's why, as I've mentioned, that reinforcement piece is the celebrations in your daily checklist, is to really, at the end of the day, think about something that you gained, something that you accomplished, some kind of, even if it's a small celebration every day, that will keep the habit stick. So that was the beginning of the week. We did the 3-part series, those 3 reasons why we drink. And then I introduced you to Jolene Park. I loved Jolene Park's TED Talk when I first started doing my own alcohol-free journey and learning process. And this lesson was a game changer for me. And that's why I brought it into my own program at an early stage of your learning process, because of this whole concept of gray area drinking. I was not familiar with that term, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with that. But for me, this was a real game changer to realize that there is such a gray area, and it's not a take it or leave it or a rock bottom, that there's so much in between. And one of the things I thought was super important about this lesson is her model, which talks about feeding your neurotransmitters. She walks us through this nourish, what she calls this nourish model, and the steps that we can take to naturally increase and to replenish our neurotransmitters of GABA, serotonin, and dopamine in natural ways versus through substances like alcohol. So her method here is the N is notice nature, observe your breath, unite with others, replenish with food, initiate movement, sit still in stillness, and then H is harness your creativity. So again, I just thought this lesson was super important to really understand that many reasons why we are triggered to grab a drink is because we don't have the proper neurotransmitters being fed in natural ways, either with food or through these other sources. Which then led us straight into our next lesson, which was purely just a list. It was a brainstorming, kind of a brain dumping list of ideas called Filling Your Drinking Time. And I put this lesson together really thinking about if there are those of you that are out there that drink out of boredom because for whatever reason you want to just kick back and you're bored and you grab a drink. There are so many other things that you can do with that drinking time. And once you ditch the booze, that opens up extra time in your evening, right? A couple good extra hours in your evening to do other things. So this lesson was no video. It was just a long laundry list of all these things, all these possibilities that are open out there for you to continue learning, listening to a podcast, watching a movie, whether it's a documentary or a Netflix series, working a puzzle, etc. Tons and tons of ideas. Now, the homework for this one was super important, and that was as you read through the list of ideas, and perhaps come up with a couple of your own, I wanted you to come up with at least 10 things that you could and would actually do. So if you're in that moment or feeling triggered and needing something to do to fill that drinking time, narrow down that list to at least 10 things. Keep that list handy. Put it on a sticky note on your desk or somewhere so that you have a go-to activity, whether it's taking the dog for a walk, that's my favorite, doing a quick meditation, walking around the block, or listening to a podcast, whatever those items are for you that make sense, that you're like, oh yeah, I could do that. Those are your go-to items. And just make sure you've got that list handy. That list is going to come in handy, not just to get to the end of this program, but for days, weeks, and months beyond just this initial 31-day challenge. So the next lesson here real quick, and I'm going to wrap up, was William Porter. Love William Porter. He's one of the books that I recommend that everyone start off the alcohol-free challenge with, is called Alcohol Explained. There's actually a series of two, number 1 and number 2. He's got it in the background of that slide there. Of his graphic. The video is a quick snapshot and it's only focused on the sleep process. And then I copied an excerpt from his book that's only about the sleep process. His book really walks us through like every system of your body and what happens when you drink alcohol. And so I wanted to really focus on this particular lesson on the sleep process because it's so important and was really key in my learning. I used to think that alcohol helped me sleep, and I would drink have a couple of glasses of wine at the end of the day. And really what it's doing is sedating you. It's not actually helping you sleep. So that was the takeaway from that lesson. So that was a quick run through the slides, and that leads us to some journal time. So I do want you to spend a couple of minutes today thinking about your celebrations, looking over the past 2 weeks. What do you feel really good about? Are there some big moments? Maybe you made it through a happy hour with friends with an alcohol-free beverage, or a night out with your spouse, and you had soda water with lime or some kind of fun mocktail instead of your normal glass or more of wine. But really think about in the past 2 weeks, what are your accomplishments, your celebrations, and not just making it to your sober pillow every night, but are there things that are a little bit bigger, maybe, that you want to celebrate? Also reflect back to the learnings as I walked you through the slides there. What are the biggest takeaways from you? What were the things that you really resonated with and you were like, oh, that's really interesting, or I didn't know that. My platform here is really an education program, and it's based on the things that I learned in my journey, because one of my favorite sayings is you can't unlearn what you've learned, right? So that's why I ask you to think about what are those biggest takeaways that you're going to remember beyond these 31 days. And then lastly is there anything you're feeling stuck on? Remember, we learn by being curious about the things that are keeping us stuck versus being judgmental and being hard on yourself. So I just ask you, is there anything that you're feeling really stuck about or don't understand? Please feel free to drop me an email, and I'd be happy to answer any questions